Hi there. In this session, we're going to briefly look at some of the things that we've been looking at over the course of the last few activities you've been doing, from the introduction to prompting through to the different ways in which the articles you've been reading about show you the ways in which you can use some of these tools to help you with some of the simple tasks that you have when you're going through the process of applying for jobs. So what I thought we would do is just walk through the three tools, taking the same prompt and looking at the different ways in which the tools respond to the prompt and the ways in which you can then guide it through the process that you need to follow to be able to get to a first draft of a CV. So the purpose of this session is to create a CV from scratch using the three tools we've been looking at, which are Chat GPT, Gemini, and Claude. Okay, so let's get straight into it. Rather than going through and typing stuff, we've pre-populated these prompts and the answers so you can get a sense of exactly what it is that each tool responds with. So starting with Chat GPT, the prompt we started with is at the top of the screen, which says, act as an experienced qualified career coach and help me write a new CV from scratch. Ask me relevant questions one at a time in order to gather the information that you need to do this task. You'll need to know my work history, the typical tasks I did in each role, and any notable accomplishments. You should then put all this information together into a standard CV template for me to edit. Take a deep breath, take your time and help him with this task. It's really important as I need to find a new job urgently and I don't have a CV yet that I can send in my applications. So what you can see with this prompt is we've put together some of the things that you've seen from the different articles that are part of the Thrive program. We're trying to encourage the tool to take its time, because this can be a great way of ensuring that it doesn't try to rush to an answer. We've asked it to kind of follow a process, to go step by step. And we've also provided a clear motivational hook. So we're trying to make sure that the tools know that this is really important to us. This can have a material impact on its output. So always think about trying to ensure that when you're explaining what it is you want these tools to do, that you're trying to follow some of those guidance notes that you've seen in the introduction to prompting article that is part of this program. So you can see what happens then is ChatGPT comes back with absolutely glad to assist you with crafting a new CV, and then it asks questions about my recent job history. So I've put some things in here. You would obviously put your actual work history in, and as a result of that, it then asks questions about typical tasks and responsibilities. So one of the areas to really consider here is before you get into trying to work through this process with the tools, is to have a really great reflection on the work that you've been doing, the types of tasks you do in your job, and making sure that you've got those really clear in your mind before you start typing stuff in. And so I've just given a brief idea here. Of course, you can go into as much detail as possible. And the more detail, the better, really, because it helps give a really great sense of the type of things that it can identify from the language you've used. That might be, for example, identifying types of skills that maybe you haven't been able to identify yourself. Or it might be, as it's doing in this instance, then asking questions about the thing that you've previously typed. So I mentioned that I've been working in a team that was handling the distribution of physical media, into this case being DVDs, and it's asking me about what tools or methodologies I use to achieve it. As a result of that, I'm then answering those questions, right? So it's getting more information about the types of things you've been doing. And you can see here that it's even identifying the sorts of things that would be useful to be able to include in the CV. So it's identifying that I've been showing adaptability, and it's also identifying that I've been able to collaborate across teams. So these are all useful bits of information that it can use as it's going through the process of deciding what to include in the CV. It then asks for further work history, which I've included, and then actually identifies that I've put a date of finishing one role in 2016 and starting the next role in December 2016, and it just wants to check to make sure that I've got that right. So it's clarifying those things. And then in the next question, it's asking me specifically about the types of strategies that I've used to achieve the goals that I've said that I achieved in the role. Again, what it's trying to do here is get to real detail of what it is you did to be able to achieve the goals that you've said that you've been able to do. I then explain that I went straight to that role, and then it talks a little bit more about wanting to go back to the point that it was making about what we were doing. And I explained what we did. And then it goes through and tries to, again, find out a little bit more about and explain the types of things that I've been doing. So it talks about customer-focused strategies, it talks about visual merchandising, it talks about my leadership and my strategic planning skills. This is all from me just saying that I've been running a team working in a store. And it's a great way of being able to kind of turn the tasks that you do into the language of skills, which can really help when you're trying to explain to prospective employers the types of things that you've been able to accomplish in your working career. It then moves us on to education, asks for information about those things. I give it some information about those things. It asks me more around specifically what grades I got. And from there, it then moves on to skills and competencies. So in this, rather than what it asks for is, could you list any specific skills or areas of expertise developed throughout my career? That might include, and then it provides a list of what it thought, and then talking about especially those proprietary tools you mentioned when working at that company. So what I did is I just kind of wrote some stuff out that, is relatively generic about the experience. For what you need to do, of course, have a think about more examples of the sorts of things that you were doing, because what you'll notice is that I didn't list out the skills. I wanted it to try and help me decide what those skills should be. And so as a result of the detailed information that I provided, it was able to come up with a robust set of skills and competencies that could be identified by the things that I've put into the answer. So that includes things like leadership in managing staff and handling stock counts and innovative approach to running local promotions. All these are things that I've put into the earlier part. And then it starts trying to help me put it into a structure of the CV format. So this allows me to then copy and paste this into another document, and I can begin to amend it myself, or I can continue the conversation with Chat GPT to further refine it. Also, when I'm happy, what I can also do is bring this example of my CV to my next conversation with my Stay Nimble career coach, and they'll be able to further ensure that you're not missing out on the real essence of who you are, and to give you the opportunity to be able to further tweak it. But you can see it's done a really great job, right? It's come up with what's called an objective, which you might know as a personal statement about kind of giving you a summary of the information that I've provided so far. So it said, motivated and results-driven retail inventory manager and store manager with over a decade of experience in inventory management, team leadership, and sales strategy implementation. And what this means is that it's kind of used all that information that I've provided to it, and then given a really synthesized version of that information in a way that's familiar to all of us in terms of a CV format. It's then taken all of the things that I've said about my experience of working at the store in Cambridge, and then also said the things that I've experienced working at the previous company as well. It summarized out my education and also then put out my list of skills based on the information that I've provided. So really, as long as you know the work that you've been doing, even if you don't necessarily have any specific goals, as long as you know the tasks you've been doing, just type it straight out. And it provides a really great draft and a starting point for you to be able to refine and make your own. So Chat GPT, really interesting way that it's tackled that. Let's have a look at Gemini and see how that's worked through this. So I've used exactly the same prompt. It's interesting to see the different ways in which the tools operate, And as a result of that, you may have a preference about which one you would use the most for this type of task. So same prompt, and Gemini's like, yeah, I can help you with that. Tell me a bit more about your overall career path? What industry have you been working in so far? So I just said retail. And then it talks a little bit about that. So let's delve into deeper in your retail experience. And then it's loads of affirming language, right? Remember, we've asked it to act like a career coach. So it's like being a store manager at Reiss is a fantastic experience. It involved lots of responsibility and showcases a variety of skills. And then it wants to know a little bit more. And it says, what were some of the typical duties as a store manager at Reiss? For instance, did you oversee sales targets, managing staff, or focusing on visual merchandising? And I just said, well, I did all of those things. Of course, what it's doing there is helping with a nice prompt of the sorts of things that you may have experienced. And obviously, you don't write the things you didn't do, but ultimately, it gives you a really good starting point for being able to think about, oh yeah, I did do those things, and I did have examples of those things that I've done. And then it talks a little bit more about sales targets, and then I explained what we did for our sales targets, and then it's asking then about staff management. I explained the situation. It's a highly flexible team, kept changing, lots of things going on. Onboarding was important. Explained a little bit more about those things, and then it asks me questions about visual merchandising. And you'll see that at each point, it's still reaffirming that it's got an understanding of the things that I've been talking about. It shows your ability to train and develop others, as an example. I then explained more about visual merchandising and the things that we were doing in the store. And then it's, again, really reaffirming the things that we've been talking about with regards to that's a great approach. Customer preferences and demonstrating strong decision-making skills. It's beginning to kind of get a flavor of the sorts of things that I've been doing based on the information that I've been providing. Then asks me about other roles, and I say I'm happy to do so. And then I explained that I used to be an assistant store manager at Blockbuster. Now, it then actually recognizes that that's interesting because Blockbuster is no longer a thing, right? So even though that might be the case, it still says that the skills that I've developed there are still going to be highly valuable. So even if the previous employer that you've been working in is no longer around, Gemini can still kind of identify some of that stuff and still try to help you with trying to figure out how to best position the experience you had at that place of work. So I explained what I did in terms of running the team. And you can see what's happening here is that a little bit of diversion from the Chat GPT conversation. It's going into a lot more flavor, I think, in terms of trying to get to a better understanding of some of the real detail of what I was doing. So rather than just asking me to list stuff out, it's actually asking me questions that give me the opportunity to explain more about the sorts of things I was doing. And then as a result of that, being able to get that data together in a place that allows us to look at it in the round so that we can make decisions about what to include in the CV and what not to include in the CV. Then ask me, would I like to start by building a CV with a standard template? I say, yeah, let's do that. So it then provides the template, what it's going to follow, and some examples of the types of things that it's going to include in the CV. And it says, just remember it's a starting point, and then asks if we'd like to move on to filling in the details for the work experience or other questions about the CV template. So again, it's still giving you the opportunity to add more information and clarify some points that it might include. And so I say, well, let's just start filling it in. So it starts filling it in, adding in the bits that we have around the work experience for each of the roles. It asks if that's okay and whether to include it, and say, yeah, that's all fine, agree with those points. And then it gives a little summary of the things that it's got so far. So it's not done the summary yet. It's going to ask me some questions about that shortly. But it has included my role history. It didn't ask me for the start and end dates when we were going through the process of putting the information in, but it's provided a space within the template to be able to ensure that you put those dates in. And then it talks around the other sections that we need to work through. So that's about skills, education and training. And then it works through and says, right, what would you like to do next? Add the summary section, add a skills section, and then add the information about education and training. And I just asked, well, I'd like some help with the summary section. And it came up with two options, one that's focused on achievements and one that's focused on career goals. Again, give some other ideas of things that you could include in that process. And it says, well, would you like to tailor one of the ones that I came up with, or would you like to come up with your own? So I said, look, let's tailor option 2. And so it's asking some questions then to make sure that we feel that this is a good example of a personal statement that reflects the things that I've been doing. So I say that sounds good. And then we've made significant progress on the CV. And then it highlights out all of the pieces it's done, talks about the skills section, asks me whether we want to go into brainstorming relevant skills. And then essentially what it does is synthesizes all the information that it's had about the different roles that I've put in. And as a result of that, it comes up with leadership and team management, inventory management, loss prevention, strong work ethic, adaptability and willingness to learn. So very specific skills and all the way down into the more general transferable skills. There are other questions that it asks to try and help really kind of get to a deeper understanding of the sorts of things that you've been accomplishing. I then cheekily ask, can you export it to a Google Doc for me? But it says it can't do that because it won't access my personal account, and it's fine. All I need to do is just copy and paste it into a document, and then I can refine it further. So that's Gemini. Quite a different approach, took us down a different tangent. And then looking at Claude. So Claude, again, exactly the same questions, and it's kind of coming, or the same prompt at the beginning, and it's coming initially to just go step by step of gathering some information. So it asks me about my name, it asks me about my current role, it asks me when I was in that role, and any other useful information about the key responsibilities and achievements. It then asks me another role before the previous one that we just talked about, and then giving the same level of information about what it was that I was doing. It inputs all of this information and say I didn't have anything further to add. Obviously, if you have a longer work experience, you just keep going until it has everything that you need. And as a result of that, it provides a summary of the types of information. If there's anything else that it needs, and it asks me about my educational background. So I explain what that is, and it begins to add in that information into the CV. I then ask it to draft it, so it comes up with a short version of a CV. Again, establishing an idea of the types of skills that I would have developed through the work that I've mentioned. So for example, I didn't say anything about Microsoft Office, but it's picked up that there's a possibility that I would have used some of those tools in my work at some point. Of course, if I haven't, I can just remove them, but it's a really neat way of being able to potentially only talk about the things you've been doing in terms of the tasks and the work you've been doing, and focusing on that, as opposed to trying to yourself list out all the things that you would include in the skills section. I then asked it to add a summary statement. It's done a really pretty good job, accomplished retail leader with over 10 years of experience driving operational excellence and revenue growth across luxury retail and entertainment brands. So really good start. And of course, with more refinement by working with your career coach, this is another really good example of a starting point that is a great reflection of some of the information that you've been providing to the tools. So in that 20 minutes, we've looked at Chat GPT, Gemini and Claude. And at the top, we said we were going to look at how we can produce a draft CV from scratch. And each tool has done a great job using the same prompt and come up with a really good summary of my work experience based on the information that I've provided to them. So best thing to do now is you can use this prompt. It's in the document at the bottom of this video, so you'll be able to use it. Just copy and paste it into whichever tool you want to be using and have a go and see what it comes up with. Work it through, try to, in advance, try and think about the tasks you've been doing in the different work experiences that you've had. Don't worry too much about accomplishments and achievements necessarily at this point. It can help, but ultimately let's just focus on the things that you know, which is the day-to-day reality of the work that you've been doing. And these tools will go through and work through a process that allows you to be able to take all the things that you know about the work you've been doing and turning it into a succinct, summarized version of all of that work history into a CV that you can begin to use as a tailoring point for future job applications. Good luck.